Um, the brain and the perception are correlated, but not the same. Perception exists beyond the human mind. Life is something that you get to a certain question, and then you either have to form belief A or belief B. And those are the two things, because life is either something that is fundamental as a bridge between the physical universe and consciousness, or it's a random result of the circumstances that were put into place. So I want to talk about the paths that these belief systems go down to try to figure out which one is more representative of the way things are. If life is fundamental to the universe, it will be emergent in every possible situation, kind of like mold or fungus. If life were fundamental as a bridge between consciousness and, observer that is created from the universe, it might be purposed in such a way for understanding itself and learning about things that happen on a certain scale that's relevant to human existence. So on the other hand, if life is a random result of circumstance, well, without anything to have stopped circumstance for 14 billion years, you would think that a pattern as complex as human life would be just a result of simple kinetic energy and matter, coexisting with enough space, which still does not disprove the idea of an intended direction or a created motion. Let me put it this way. Galaxies we see without evidence of life to have influenced anything. Therefore, dark energy and the laws of physics allowed galaxies to emerge pretty much everywhere. And that within itself is a pattern, an undeniable mechanical machine. A galaxy, is made of parts that interlock and depend on each other to create certain circumstances that allow other parts to emerge. Obviously, that either insinuates that complex patterning is a basic function of the universe. Therefore, as the patterns get more complicated, consciousness can arise and life forms, individuals. So that being, a deeper step into what happens if the universe is just a random explosion. In which case, many would take a materialist view and learn about physics and, consider the philosophy of thought to be within the realm of governable, describable math. So, how do we prove either way in this question? Well, there's an even better question. If you look back again at the human brain, the currency of chemical energy determines things like how your synapses fire in frequency and which ones, how many of them, and mood and happiness and things like thought patterns are affected and influenced by the chemical energy that's going to those parts of the brain. So you can think of it as like a currency. You have this much, you want to spend it on that, you can. And so the fact that the brain is an energy-based system is a good place to pull into the philosophy that we're actually quantum gods and our consciousness is fundamental to the existence of reality in a small, single person form against the entire universe, which couldn't exist without consciousness as a whole, which still does not negate materialism in any way, because non-locality is something that's described in math very well, and quantum entanglement, backwards time, negative time, they don't want to call it backwards. What do we prove this with? Well, given that materialism can point us towards a law, a physical law that would describe and predict the way that consciousness functions, we think about how, the universe itself, the physical world itself, is equal in magnitude to consciousness. They're coexistent, they're co-emergent, they're codependent, they're equal. And maybe not even separate things. Therefore, materialism says that the emergence of life from conditions in the physical world insinuates that laws of the physical world determine how consciousness behaves. What are these laws of the physical world, though? Because consciousness is not baryonic. Consciousness and the material world pause there for a second, because time plays into this. Evolution plays into this. the universe evolved over time into what it is now, and the physical world should have no reason to not be the language of the consciousness realm. What I mean by this is to access the highest levels of consciousness, you know, the key should lie in the physical world, which is why energy comes back into play as the currency that the brain uses to communicate within itself. I mean, once you get beyond survival, you start going into realms of metaphysics. And if you use things like psychedelics, you go beyond metaphysics into the realm of hallucinations and things that can be processed in higher consciousness that can't be processed in lower consciousness exist with equal brevity as the things that we interact with day by day, such as hypercubes, DMT entities, infinity. You know, people talk about infinite bliss by meditation, and that's something that I've never had the experience of, and am rightfully skeptical to compare it to things like DMT because of the absolute intensity of DMT and the realness of the hallucinations. But then you can even talk about things like psychosis, altered states of psychiatric disorders that cause hallucinations. And so it's not that it only has to be, a psychedelic molecule for this process, I mean, the brain molecules that you already have are a currency. It's all just physical energy. And there's levels of consciousness, just like there are levels of dimensionalities in the physical world. If you zoom in all the freaking way, you get the smallest things have the highest levels of energy. Electrons, and so when you touch a wall, all of the electrons activate and become aware that they're being pushed against. Awareness really is a curious thing. Self-organization is the lowest level of awareness. And things like zygotes, function with low levels of awareness because they're high levels of patterning. And when they get high enough that the individual life form can self-organize within its experience with energy that exists from the outside world and information, that's considered intelligence. And then that has epigenetic properties. For you to be able to create anything is, puts you at a level of awareness higher than something that can only self-organize, And when the patterning gets that high, that the level of consciousness is available to the brain that the life form possesses, you get vision and thought and free will and, philosophy and society I've got about 20 minutes total to talk here, so 5 are left. The music is playing in the background, music I wrote, and so I'm taking from that as well. The human being is the purpose of intelligence to have emerged in this universe. It's the instrument by which experience gives meaning to energy. You know what I mean? If there was no human, there would be no point for any of this to exist. And that's the centric, or if you think about multiverse theory, you come to the conclusion that in a universe, what we have been talking about, what I have been talking about, which is whether or not life is a symptom of existence of physical matter, therefore, in multiverse theory, would each universe be created with the anthropomorphic principle of requiring life for it to even have meaning to its own existence? Because if you tweak the Higgs field, you get a universe that can't sustain anything at all. That one little setting of the background noise in this world determines whether or not we would have been able to emerge in this way. So don't look at multiverse theory as every single, setting that's tweakable. Look at it as every single possible emergence of existence that has a separation between other emergences in a physical way. Some people look at multiverse theory as there are bridges and it's interactable and there are timeline splits and stuff, and more esoteric consciousnesses, can communicate between dimensions or whatever beyond 4 or 5. Even philosophy, just you have to abide by the same definitions of terms. Otherwise, you can just say, well, universe means one everything that exists, and therefore multiverse is just a nonsense. But see past that, because possibility is really what we're talking about when we say multiverse. Possibility based on what is already there and available. And so that tries to sum into, what I'm saying, which is that, using cannabis and, psychedelics can lead to esoteric states of consciousness that allow, and we're not saying better. I'm saying different. I'm saying higher levels. I'm saying equal in magnitude. Experience might seem more real in the moment, or like infinitely times more blissful. But the point is that they're just, life, it's just different resonations. And so even the lowest level is alive, which could be a straight line. It could be, a dot. Could be life. And therefore a molecule is comprised of this dot behaving in every possible way. And that's basically what string theory is, All right, video's over now.